So here we have a common pivot table use case. We've got a bunch of columns here, all well organized. The names are consistent, all the labels and categories are consistent here. My data is good, it's complete, I don't have missing values or anything. I've got dates, regions, the number of transactions for each region, the revenue generated from those transactions, expenses, and profit. So I'm going to have one entry for every region for every day of the year. So we want to analyze this data to answer a bunch of questions. So first step, we're going to create a pivot table for the transactional data. So I'm just going to make sure a cell is highlighted somewhere in this table, doesn't really matter where. I'm going to click Insert, Pivot Table, and I'm going to put it on a new worksheet. So that's good. I've got to go back to transactions. I'm going to press Control Home to jump to the top. Now we need to edit our pivot table to answer some questions. So what was the total profit for August? So date for rows, profit for value. That's given to us. So date for rows, profit for values. Now this is already summarized by month, so that's helpful. Total revenue for August. I'm going to paste the value only. I want to keep my pretty yellow formatting there. Total profit for August. All right, that was good. What was the total profit for a week of September 3rd through 9th? Okay, so in our pivot table, Microsoft Excel automatically grouped by month. That was the default grouping it thought was appropriate. Well, we want to group by week. So I'm going to right click in that date column and click group. So you can see months is selected, but I want days now. So I'm going to select days, unselect months. Whoops. Go back to group. Days, I want to make sure the number of days is 7. So that you can see there's no week here, but we can do 7 days. So September 3rd through 9th, I had $85,612.17 in revenue. So I'll paste that value in there. Sorry, that was profit. I might have said revenue. North revenue in December. Okay, so if we go back to our pivot table, we see we don't have region in here. So let's add region as a column. So now we have a combination of region and date, and we're doing calculations for each one of those combinations. So this is kind of like a really, if I did a SUMIF function for each one of these values. So this is kind of like, I've got 52 weeks in the year times 4 regions. This is 208 SUMIF functions, basically, is what I'm doing. Now we don't want to group by week here. We want to group by month. So I'm going to unselect those. And we don't want profit. So here it's looking for revenue. Right. Let's look at our look at the question. What was the total revenue for the North region in December? So make sure that the right column, the right field is selected for those values. So in December, North was 380,449. So I'm going to paste that value in there. So the South region's July proportion of revenue. Okay, so this is just showing the sum of revenue, but now I want to know the proportion of revenue. So in July, we can see that the South region had $247,000 of revenue, and in July, across all regions, there was $1,440,203. So basically, we are going to be doing the 247,449 divided by 144,0203. We're doing that calculation there. We're dividing the South's revenue by the total revenue for that month. So that's, oops, we just did it manually, but let's do it in the pivot table. because we don't want the sum of revenue now. Let's go to the value field settings. we're going to show value as the percent of row total. So the row total right now is in column F. So when I click OK, we should see that the South, 17.18, just as we had calculated over here. So that's good. Paste. All right. Format that as a percent so it shows up correctly. Show my decimal places, however many you want. Now the number of transactions in the West. So we've got a transactions column. This is a little bit tricky, the way it's worded. Now we don't need to group by date anymore, so I'm going to drag that off. We don't want to look at revenue. We do want to look at transactions. So ask yourself, do I want the sum of transactions or the count of transactions? And the answer is we actually want the sum of transactions. Usually when somebody asks for a count of something, you'll use the count function. Let's see, what was the question? Number of transactions in the West, 12,471. What would happen if I change that to a count? So instead of sum of transactions, value field settings, I go to count. It's going to be 365 for each of my regions because I recorded a value for transactions in each of the days of the year. So if I'm just counting up the number of values in that transaction field, if I look at my raw data, it's saying, okay, West found one, West found one, West found one. It's going to ignore that number, but really we want to add up all of those numbers. So that's why we're still using the sum, even though we are looking for a total count. And there we are, we're good to go. So that's how we were able to use a pivot table to answer these questions, and you can answer a ton more questions using this data. And as you can see, just manipulating the data in pivot tables lets you analyze a lot of data quickly without having to write a whole bunch of functions.